Chapter 8, Prefects Meeting. "We won't speak to her," Lloyd said. "Not ever again. Understand, H?" He pulled on his sock with such ferocity that his big toe came through the end. With a shout of rage, he flung the sock into the wastepaper basket and took a clean one out of the drawer. "But how can we not?" Harvey said miserably. "She doesn't know anyone except us. If we don't talk to her—" "Black bananas! Think I care about that? After the way she's treated us? You're too soft, H. That's what's wrong with you. Well, just watch it. If I catch you speaking to her, I won't look after you anymore. And I'll tell the others not to look after you either. Then you'll be in trouble." Ramming his shoes on, Lloyd stamped off downstairs, and a moment later an unhappy Harvey followed him. They sat hunched over their plates of porridge, turned away from Dinah and talking only to each other. From time to time, Lloyd glanced at her to see what effect they were having, but it was impossible to tell. She went on eating her breakfast without speaking, her cold, pale face gazing off into the distance. When the time came to leave, she followed them out into the hall and left the house with them. But they marched along the road 10 metres ahead of her, not looking over their shoulders. "Just let her dare try to catch us up," Lloyd muttered. "She won't do that," Harvey said. "She's too proud. Oh, shut up. I don't want you going on about her all day. She's not here. She doesn't exist. Understand?" Lloyd strode faster up the road and swept into the playground, his eyes searching about. "We must find Ian and Mandy and Ingrid and warn them about her. Tell them not to talk to her either. Then she'll only have the goody-goodies and she won't get much fun out of them." He saw the other three in a corner and marched across to them, followed by Harvey. But before he could say anything, silence fell over the playground and everyone turned to look at the prefects. There seemed to be something odd about them today. They were smirking at each other and hunting round the playground with their eyes, as if they were looking for somebody. Suddenly, Ian poked Lloyd in the ribs. "Hey," he mouthed soundlessly. "Why are they all looking at Harvey?" It was true. 6 pairs of eyes had fixed on Harvey's chubby figure, and 6 smiles had grown wider. Harvey started to shake. Mandy reached out and gripped his hand comfortingly. "Don't worry," she mouthed. "It might not be as bad as you think." But Harvey was already worried. As the prefects rapped out their orders and the children started to move into lines, he caught at Lloyd's sleeve. "Don't leave me alone, Al." "Okay," Lloyd patted his shoulder. "We'll stick together." As they moved across the playground, he avoided his usual place and went to stand in Harvey's line instead, immediately behind him. He saw Dinah glance quickly across at him, but he ignored her. "Lead in!" Jeff shouted. As the lines began to move, Lloyd put a steadying hand on Harvey's arm and the two of them walked together up the steps. When they were nearly at the top, Rose stuck out a hand, blocking Harvey's way. "Harvey Hunter," she intoned, "you are summoned to appear before the Prefects' Council at 10 o'clock. "Why?" Harvey said plaintively. "I haven't done anything." "That's right," Lloyd blustered. "Leave him alone." Rose gave him an icy stare. "You are in the wrong line, Lloyd Hunter." "That's because I'm sticking by Harvey. I don't know what you're plotting, but I'm coming too." He saw Rose open her mouth to protest, and he said quickly, "Even in the courts, people are allowed to have lawyers to speak for them." Rather to his surprise, Rose shrugged. "Please yourself. You can be Harvey's lawyer. It won't do any good. 10 o'clock. For an hour, Lloyd sat in his classroom, chewing the end of his pencil. All around him, people were scribbling industriously, writing facts about the British Constitution. Lloyd did not know the facts, as usual, but this morning he did not even care. All he could think of was the minute hand on the clock on the wall. It seemed to be racing round towards 10 o'clock at twice its normal speed. At 5 to 10, he stuck his hand up. "Yes?" barked Mr. Venables, looking startled. People hardly ever put their hands up. It was not encouraged. "Please, sir, I've got to go to the Prefects' Council." Mr. Venables frowned. "I was not informed. This is most disorderly." "I've got to go," Lloyd insisted. Without even waiting for an answer, he bounded out of his seat and made for the door. He could see Dinah watching him, and he almost pulled a face at her. Then he remembered. No communication. Outside the door of the prefect's room, Harvey was standing shivering. "Oh, what do you think is going on? What are they going to do to me now?" "Dunno. We'll have to go in and find out." Lloyd slapped him encouragingly on the back. "Cheer up. At least the snow's melted. They can't make us do that again anyway." Boldly, he hammered on the door and heard Jeff's voice say, "Come in." The prefects were sitting in a line behind a long table, their faces grave and their uniforms immaculate. Each of them had a pen clipped neatly into the top blazer pocket at precisely the same angle, and their hands were folded on the table in front of them in a straight row, 6 doubled fists. "Sit down," said Rose, pointing at 2 chairs drawn up on the other side of the table. "What's this all about?" Lloyd muttered. "What's going on?" "Sit down," Rose said again, more curtly, "and don't speak unless we ask you questions." Lloyd and Harvey took the 2 chairs and sat facing the row of accusing eyes. Slowly, Jeff reached out for a grey folder which lay on the table. A neat label on the front said, Harvey Hunter. Opening it, he pulled out a piece of paper. "Harvey Hunter," he began, "we've called you before us on the instructions of the headmaster to deal with your disobedient and disorderly behaviour this week. He has been most displeased with you." Rose nodded. "You are a disruptive influence in the school." "That's nonsense," Lloyd burst out. "He's never influenced anybody." "Please be quiet," said Jeff, "and listen to the charges." He looked down at the piece of paper. "You're accused of 3 things. First, on Monday, you came into school before you were called in by us, although you know it's against the rules to come in early. Have you anything to say?" I was going to do the registers," Harvey faltered. "The headmaster told me to." Jeff shook his head and ran a finger down the paper. "Clearly rubbish. My information is that Sharon Mandeville did the registers on Monday." "It was a mistake," Lloyd said quietly. "The headmaster changed his mind." "The headmaster never changes his mind," Rose said crushingly. "Indecision is disorder." "Second," Jeff went on relentlessly, "later the same day, in the afternoon, you left your classroom telling Rose that you wanted to go to the toilet. Instead, you went up to the hall to spy on the assembly, which you are not permitted to attend." Harvey gasped and turned to look at Lloyd, but this time Lloyd could only shrug. "Third," Jeff said, "yesterday in the playground you threw 2 snowballs, although you knew that playing anywhere on school premises is most strictly forbidden." "But that's not fair," Lloyd shouted. "He's already been punished for that." "The prefects took such action as they saw fit," Rose said crushingly, "but the matter has not yet been dealt with by the headmaster. We are now acting under his instructions." "I don't believe you," Lloyd said. "If the headmaster wants to deal with Harvey, why doesn't he see him himself?" But even as he spoke the words, he knew they were stupid. Simultaneously, the figures round the table chanted, "The prefects are the voice of the headmaster. They must be obeyed." "Well," said Lloyd desperately, "if you're the voice of the headmaster, then when you punished Harvey yesterday, that was a punishment from the headmaster, and it isn't fair to give him another one." Harvey twisted his hands together wretchedly. "Oh, Elle, what's the use? This isn't really like a court. They're not going to let me off whatever you say. Why don't we just shut up and hear what they're going to do to me?" Rose gave a patronising smile. "I'm glad to see that one of you has some sense, especially since the headmaster has decided to be merciful." "He has?" Harvey looked disbelieving. Rose nodded. "He will give you a chance to redeem yourself." She reached into the file and drew out a long white envelope with Harvey's name written on the front. "He has set you a paper of sums to do. If you get them all right, your offences will be forgotten, this time. But if you get any of them wrong, the headmaster will deal with you himself, most severely." Harvey gulped. "Is that all? Can I go?" Jeff nodded. "Go straight back to your classrooms and get on with your work. The sums are not to be done until you get home." He smiled sarcastically. "You never know. If you do them well enough, you might land up on Eddie Hare's great school quiz." Lloyd snorted. "I can just see us being the headmaster's blue-eyed boys." Ignoring Jeff's frown, he made for the door. As soon as he and Harvey were safely outside, he exploded. "Of all the stupid, trumped-up, unfair charges!" Harvey looked sideways at him, his eyes scared. "But how did they know, Elle, about me going into school early and going to look at the assembly? No one knew about both things, only me and you." Lloyd stopped in the middle of the corridor. "Yes," he said softly. "Oh, exploding eggshells! There was someone else who knew. Dinah saw you go into school early and you told her that you watched the assembly. But she wouldn't have told, would she? Lloyd pulled a face. Of course she would. It's all her fault you're in trouble. Like yesterday, that was her fault too. Then he saw Harvey start to look upset and he put an arm around his shoulders. Never mind, it could be worse. They've only given you sums to do, and you're quite good at sums. I expect they're hard, Harvey faltered. Let's have a look. Harvey ripped open the envelope and pulled out 3 sheets of paper folded together. He glanced at them briefly and then said, in a horrified voice, I'll never work out the answers. I can't even understand the questions. Let me see. Lloyd snatched the papers out of his hand. I can always help you. He began to read with scornful confidence. But a moment later, he, too, was looking completely baffled. You see, Harvey said, we can't. Oh, what am I going to do? Lloyd took the envelope and pushed the papers back into it. We'll let Mandy take a look. She's quite good at sums. And if that doesn't work, we'll show them to Mum when we get home. She'll help you if she can. And if she can't, all at once he looked pleased, she'll see they're much too difficult for you, then even she will have to admit there's something peculiar going on. When they got home, Mrs. Hunter was sitting in the kitchen having a cup of tea with Dinah. Lloyd walked straight past Dinah without even looking at her. Mum, we want to talk to you. Well, of course, Mrs. Hunter smiled. Have a cup of tea? Lloyd flicked his fingers impatiently. No, we want to talk to you alone. At once his mother stiffened. I've told you about that before. Dinah's a member of the family and you must treat her like one. If you've got anything to say, you can say it with her here. But you don't understand, Lloyd began sulkily. Please, Elle, Harvey broke in, don't waste time. Let's just show her the sums. He pulled the papers out of the envelope and threw them on the table. The headmaster gave them to him, Lloyd said, and they're terrible. You must help him. Mrs. Hunter shook her head. Now, you know you mustn't cheat. If the headmaster gave them to Harvey, he means him to do them by himself. But, Mum, I can't, Harvey said pathetically. They're awful. You look. Mrs. Hunter picked up the paper and scanned it. Then she gave a little laugh. It's no use. It doesn't mean anything to me. I don't understand any of this new maths you all do. It's not new maths, Harvey shouted. It's just incredibly difficult. Now, dear, Mrs. Hunter said a little sharply. Calm down. Let me give you a cup of tea, then you can go away quietly by yourself and look at it. I'm sure you'll find it's all right when you think about it. The headmaster wouldn't be unreasonable. That's what you think, Lloyd said bitterly. He's a maniac. Don't be silly, Mrs. Hunter said. I'm sure he's not a maniac. Is he, Dinah? With an expression of utter misery on her face, Dinah said, The headmaster is a marvellous man, and this is the best school I've ever been to. It's no good asking her, Lloyd shouted. It's all her fault. She's the one who got Harvey into trouble. Me? Dinah said. Yes, you. He glared at her, and she stared back, looking completely baffled. Oh, what's the use of quarrelling? Harvey said desperately. What does it matter? All that matters is that I've got these sums to do and I can't do them, and nobody can help me. It's going to be awful. He snatched at the papers and ran out of the room, banging the door behind him. See what you've done? Lloyd shouted at Dinah. Oh, I wish you'd never come. He ran after Harvey, banging the door again, and found him in the playroom, huddled in a chair. His shoulders were shaking and he was beginning to sob fiercely. Oh, H, do stop it. That won't help. Nothing will help, said Harvey in a totally wretched voice. I shan't be able to do the sums, and tomorrow I'll have to go and see the headmaster, and it will be frightful, and oh! With a loud wail, he buried himself deep in the cushions. At that moment, the playroom door opened again. Please, may I see the sums? Said a stiff little voice from the doorway. Chapter 9, Dinah's Secret. Dinah had not expected them to be nice to her. It cost her quite a lot to push the door open. But at the sight of Harvey sobbing among the cushions, she was sure she had done the right thing. Please, may I see the sums? No, you may not, Lloyd snapped. You only want to gloat, don't you? You're just a mean, horrible... Harvey raised a tear-stained face from the cushions. Oh, let her, he said wearily. What difference can it make? I don't think she's horrible enough to gloat, even if you do. There you are, Di. There are the beastly sums, on the floor. Dinah bent down and picked up the pieces of paper. Her cheeks had turned red and her heart was thudding uncomfortably. "Be quiet," a voice in her head was saying. "Don't be too clever. Don't give yourself away." She looked at Harvey and then at Lloyd's wretched, worried face, and then at the sums. "Aren't they impossible?" Lloyd said. Dinah took a deep breath. "There's no way either of you could do them." "Ha ha," Lloyd sneered. "And I suppose you could, clever clogs." "Yes," Dinah said slowly. "Yes, I can." Lloyd stared at her. "It's all right, Harvey," said Dinah. "I can do your sums." There was total silence. Harvey's mouth fell open and Lloyd went on staring. "I can do them," Dinah said again. Harvey sat up, blinking at them. His hair flopped over his eyes and his cheeks were red. "Honest?" "Honest," said Dinah reluctantly. "Give me a pen and some paper and I'll do them now." She felt their eyes watching her as she sat down at the table and read the first sum. "You need to use probability theory for that one," she said briskly. Her eye travelled on down the page. "And spherical geometry for that one. And this one, phew," she whistled. "You need tensor calculus for that. He really didn't mean you to do them, did he?" "But you can do them," Harvey said anxiously. "I told you." Her pen started to move across the paper, and behind her she heard Lloyd gasp in disbelief. Taking no notice, she plunged into the sums, completely absorbed. One or two of the problems were so difficult that she had to think hard, and she began to hum softly, enjoying herself. By the time she'd finished, the two boys were staring at her with awed curiosity. How on earth did you do them?" Lloyd said awkwardly. Dinah sat back in her chair. "I'm clever." Lloyd's mouth twitched as if he were going to jeer, and she laughed suddenly. "No, I'm not boasting. I'm really clever, at sums and all sorts of things like that." "Nobody told us," Lloyd said sulkily. "Nobody knows." Dinah pulled a face. "Can't you imagine how other children would treat me? They'd be mean. I found that out when I was about 5. So I decided to play stupid. I kept quiet and I just went on finding out about things myself, at the library and so on, and no one's ever guessed. Nobody's known about me until now." Lloyd still looked dubious, but Harvey gave a sudden crow of delight. "So you've done the horrible old sums! Whoopee!" He jumped to his feet and did a little jig. "I'm starving." "Should just think you are," Lloyd said gruffly, "after all that stupid fuss you made. Here, have this." He pulled a Mars bar out of his pocket and tossed it over. Tearing off the paper, Harvey began to cram it into his mouth greedily, but Lloyd was still staring at Dinah. "You didn't want anyone to know you were clever," he said slowly. "You've hidden it all these years, but you've told us now. Why?" Dinah looked down at her fingers, feeling embarrassed. "I couldn't let Harvey... Well, I was sorry for him." "But we've been foul to you." She grinned wryly. "You've been foul to me. Harvey's been quite nice." Lloyd frowned. "But it doesn't make any sense. You've just got Harvey out of trouble, but it was you that got him into it. It must have been you that told about him going into school early and spying on the assembly. No one else knew." Dinah shook her head. "It wasn't me that told. Anyway, Rose saw him going in for the registers. She was watching through the window. Perhaps someone saw him outside the hall as well." "But you lied about the snowballs, and you keep saying how marvellous the school is, and telling about the films you see in assembly, and it's all lies. You know it is. I can't understand you at all." Dinah put her face in her hands. "It's worse than that," she said slowly. Then she paused for a moment. Somehow, talking about it made it seem realer, more frightening. But if she did not talk about it now, she never would. She forced herself to go on. "I don't understand me. All those things you've described, they come out mechanically, before I've decided what I'm going to say. And when I say how marvellous the school is, I know what I really think, but I can't say it." "But that's ridiculous." Lloyd began to march up and down the room. "Why should you say things you don't want to?" Harvey had finished eating the Mars bar and was watching them both with quiet interest. All of a sudden, he said, "Assembly." "What?" Lloyd stopped pacing and looked at him. "What do you mean?" Harvey wiped his chocolate-covered fingers on the arm of the chair. "It must be something to do with assembly. It's the only place Dinah goes where neither of us does. What happened in assembly today, Di?" "In assembly this afternoon," Dinah chanted, "we saw a film about coal mines and..." She clapped her hand over her mouth and with a visible effort stopped speaking. That's right, Harvey said. You didn't. I felt so rotten this afternoon I hardly did any work, just looked out of the window, and the lights never went out. Dinah looked distressed. Don't you see? She said urgently. It's the same thing again. I've said that something happened, a long explanation that came reeling out before I could think about it, and you say it's not true, just like you said about the snowball fight. And we're right, insisted Lloyd. Slowly Dinah nodded. I think you might be. But why should I say these things? And if we don't see films in assembly, what happens? Her eyes were big and worried. You must remember, Di, Harvey said. If you were there, you must remember it somehow, with some part of your brain. Go on, remember it. Remember it. Say that again, Dinah muttered in an odd voice. Harvey was puzzled. I just said, go on, remember it. Remember it. Go on, Dinah said. Don't stop, it's coming. Remember it. Remember it, remember it, chanted Harvey. Dinah's forehead creased as if she were making a mammoth effort. Remember it, remember it, remember it. And if she were in a daze, she started to mumble and stutter, hip, hip, hypno, and then her face flooded with joyful excitement. Hypnotism, she yelled, banging her fist down on the table. That's it, hypnotism. Lloyd looked at her doubtfully. That's it, she said, her eyes glowing. The first day when I went into assembly, I didn't look at the headmaster's eyes when the others did. I closed mine, and I heard him hypnotise everyone else. But then he caught me. I just had time to think, remember it, and then I was hypnotised and I forgot, until Harvey brought it back. The headmaster hypnotises everyone in assembly. She stared round triumphantly at them. But why? Harvey said dubiously. What's the point? Dinah shrugged. It's a good way to keep everyone in order, and you know how he likes order. While they're hypnotised, he tells them what to do when they wake up, and they can't help doing it, like me saying those things. And I think, she paused considering, I think he probably makes us learn things parrot fashion while we're hypnotised. Then when we're awake, we can remember them and write them down. A quick way to produce a school full of geniuses, Lloyd said sourly. But Dinah shook her head. We're not learning to think. We're just learning to repeat things like robots. It looks good, but it's no use at all. Harvey shuddered. It's horrible. It's all right for you, Dinah said. He doesn't do it to you. I wonder why not. He can't, Harvey said. We're invulnerable. He was only joking, but Dinah looked serious. I think you might be right. Some people can't be hypnotised. Has he ever tried it with you, gazed into your eyes and told you you were tired? Yes, Lloyd said slowly. He did once. When I first came to school, he took off his glasses and stared at me and said, Lloyd, you're very tired. You are very, very sleepy. And what happened? Nothing much. I just said, no, sir, I'm fine, thank you. So did I, put in Harvey. He did it to me too. I just thought he was being silly. Oh, no, Dinah said slowly. I don't think he's silly at all. He's cruel and terrifying, and he's got an obsession with tidiness, but he's not silly. He's very, very clever. He's got a whole school full of children who will do precisely what he wants. He must feel very powerful. Her voice was awed. Very powerful, she said again. If I were him, I don't think I'd be satisfied with having one measly school in my power. What do you mean? Harvey said. She looked round at them. Think of it. He's got a whole army of people like me, who'll do and say exactly what he wants. Why should he stop there? Sooner or later, he's going to want to do something with his army. There was a long, tense pause. Then Harvey said, Elle, don't you think we should bring the others in on this? Lloyd looked carefully at Dinah. Think she can be trusted? Of course, Harvey said impatiently. Look what she's just done for me. He flapped the paper with the sums on. We'll swear her to secrecy tomorrow after school.